presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had you guys backwards.
All right. I call to order the meeting of the Personnel Committee on September 6, 2023 at 4:01 p.m. First item is the approval of minutes. I'll need a motion on the approval of the August 9th, 2023 Personnel Committee minutes.
I'll move approval.
We have a motion for approval by Alder Ditzer. Any comments? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Next on the agenda is public appearances for non-agenda items. I don't believe we have anybody from the public present, so we can move on to item 4, agenda items. 4A, classification title update, updating the classification title of electronic services librarian to digital services librarian.
Yeah, so I have Wendy here joining us, but I attached in the packet the electronic services librarian job description. We are really just renaming, replacing the word electronic and putting in digital, and Wendy can explain the reasoning why, but that is the only change. So it's really just a classification title change, no pay change, nothing like that. So Wendy, did you want to add additional information to that?
Sure. So this is really just a terminology update. I think electronic services was a phrase that we used a lot in the 2000s, and it just needs to be updated. So there's no responsibility change, no pay change, just kind of updates it a little bit.
Great. Looks fairly straightforward. Questions?
Is there, what's the difference between electronic and digital in the context?
I think digital includes more things. I think electronic was sort of what we called databases before we were streaming audio, books, video, that kind of thing. So I think digital just gives kind of a broader terminology.
Okay.
So we'll just need approval from the personnel committee on that one.
All right. All those in favor of the classification title update, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.
All right, on to agenda item 4B. Oh, I'm sorry, did we take a motion on that classification title update?
Not really, but.
No, maybe we should, let's backtrack.
I'll move approval.
Move approval, great. All in favor of the classification title update, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you.
Now moving on to item 4B, reclassification of Code Enforcement Inspector 2.
Did you want to do a move?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's go do a motion. I'll need a motion to reclassify the Code Enforcement Inspector 2.
I'll move approval.
Great, we have a motion.
Perfect. All right. So we have, I'm going to show you actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and show you the org chart for the building inspection department. I think it'll help to understand how they are currently structured. So we have John Crook, who is our building inspection manager. Then we have a Code Enforcement Inspector 1, Gabe Schrader, and a Code Enforcement Inspector 2, Jack Pearson. And then we've got Paul Scott, Code Enforcement Inspector 3. So today's reclassification is for Jack Pearson. Jack's been with us since 2000. About 5 years ago, we created this 1 through 3 series, and we reclassed him to a 2 5 years ago. Over the last 5 years, he's taken on numerous duties. He's taken on basically commercial properties, so performing acceptance tests on commercial alarm systems, commercial sprinkler systems. He reviews building and site plans, specifications, and proceeds to approve plans. He also provides training to our Code Enforcement Inspector 1, Gabe, who started this year. He also is going for his commercial plumbing certification and already holds all the certifications required for the level 3 Code Enforcement Inspector. So with that, since he's already, if you look at the job description included in the packet, we have a Code Enforcement Inspector 1, 2, and 3. He's performing everything in the 3. So with that, we would like to propose that he is reclassified to the higher level of the Code Enforcement Inspector 3 because he fits within that class specification.
And question, so that I assume there's a pay change.
There is a pay
associated
change
with
for
that.
this one, yeah.
And are we going to use, what source are we using for the increase in pay for the
Yeah,
listed
so
accounts?
included in there, so the finance director did
Sounds
provide
good.
that we have some salary savings from the addition of the Code Enforcement Inspector 1, but he didn't start till March, so we have some savings
Great.
from that position.
And have we already discussed for the 2024 budget to
Yes.
include the continuation?
Yes.
Great. Well, I know Jack deals with a lot of constituent concerns. I see him, he's very active. One of the staff members I interact with quite frequently, and he's pretty extraordinary. And sounds like a well-deserved promotion. So, any other questions from?
Nope.
Great. All those in favor of reclassifying Code Enforcement Inspector 2, Jack Pearson, to Code Inspector 3, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to item 4C, adding the classifications of Engineering Technician 1 and Engineering Technician 3. So we talk about this first and then we can, so there's more than one motion.
Yeah, so oddly, in our pay plan, we only have an engineering technician 2 level. We don't have a 1 and we don't have a 3, which the 3 is fine because that's something brand new, but you would think that we would have a level 1 before we just have a 2. So what we're trying to do is insert a 1 through 3 series into the pay plan. So we included in the packet was the job description or class specification for a 1, 2, 3 engineering technician. So we are hoping that we can have an entry level, someone with 1 year of experience is at that 1 level, someone with a little bit more experience at the 2, and then your more advanced 6 years of experience would be at that 3 level. So we are not looking at reclassifying anyone at this meeting, but really just trying to build in that series because we would like to start to recruit at a 1 or a 2 or even a 3 level. We have a current vacancy right now at an engineering level 2 and we're not getting candidates. So maybe if we can post it as a 1 with lesser experience, we might be successful in filling it. So I got Tim on here too in case you have any questions about it, but we feel it's something that's been needed for a while, so we're glad to actually finally get that engineering tech 1 in there and then add a 3 level as well. Tim, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you guys don't have any more questions. I thought it was explained pretty well.
How long have we been recruiting for that engineering technician 2 position?
Easily 6 months.
Oh, wow, okay, so it's a
It's been a
long
while.
time. Do we anticipate potentially redoing that position?
We might have to do a
Search.
trainee, so we're gonna try to post it as a 1 or a 2, and then if we're still not successful, then we'll post it as with a trainee designation where we're gonna just train them and get them up to that 1 level.
Tim, are there implications here in terms of the licensing that a level 1, 2, or 3 engineer might have? I know we've talked in Public Works about the PE requirement.
Yeah, for the engineering technician, a PE license isn't required. For the engineer technician 3, one of the requirements would be a concrete certification. And that we put in there that they have, I believe, 6 months to obtain if they don't have it. I think that, and then as far as the degrees, it would just be an associate's degree we're looking for an engineering technician.
So the project engineers are still, the senior project engineers will still have that PE requirement, but the engineering technicians will never have that PE requirement. That's gonna be solely with the engineers.
Correct.
Do the senior engineers, they manage the engineering technicians? Is that how the structure works, or?
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, so in each division in engineering, we have streets, we have environmental, and then, which is stormwater, and then also utilities. So there's an engineer and then an engineering technician underneath the engineer.
Any other questions?
Nope.
So should we do these one at a time?
No, you can approve the classification or the class specification for a 1 through 3. That's perfect, yep.
So I'll need a motion about approving the classifications for engineering technician 1, 2, and 3.
I will move approval.
If there's no more discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Moving on to agenda item 4D, Police Department staffing presentation.
All set, 30 minutes, starts the clock.
Okay, start the part now. I just want to give a little background before we get into our presentation.
taken over in October of 2021. There was talk that in 2022, there would be a push for each department to come up with a strategic staffing plan on what the needs were for our organization. In doing that, the staffing plan moved on to 2023, where we came up with the Baker Tilly piece that we're going to talk about today. I do want to mention that at the start of 2022, our department, our command team spent a considerable amount of time doing the research to identify and pull the data to come up with the information that were presented to you, that we presented to Baker Tilly, and hence were the parts that Baker Tilly addressed in their findings. In doing that, I do want to thank our command staff because this was separate from their daily duties. So I want to thank Deputy Chief Matt Leahy, Lieutenant Ed Hardwick, Lieutenant Andrew McCarthy, and Assistant Service Manager Dana Schmidt, who again spent a lot of time in pulling the data and pulling the charts and giving the information that you're going to be seeing today. Some of the things that you should consider of the things we did or the data that we pulled to understand the numbers that you're receiving today and the purposes of them. We pulled the things to take into consideration is geosize, the geographic size of the area of your responsibility, the population and projected growth of the city, the calls for service and response times, experience of the department, and the contractual time off that is provided to a staff where now you determine minimum staffing needs. And without taking too much, there was a lot of information points that we researched to come up with the information we'll provide today, and I'll let our staff proceed with the presentation.
So obviously, the request of the Personnel Committee was to do kind of a deep dive into both police and fire coming off the heels of Baker Tilly, because there's a lot of complexities in both fire and police, just purely based on the amount of employees, the different shifts, and the different ranks in the command structure. But just as a highlight from the Baker Tilly, the emergent priorities from the Baker Tilly report, recommendation number 14, to improve police department recruiting process. And if you do look at a lot of those suggestions made by Baker Tilly, a lot of those things that we're already doing. But obviously there's some HR staffing concerns to really bolster the recruitment process, as well as some contractual items in there that we can't always remedy very quickly. But moving on to recommendation number 15, the review of the command structure of the police department. That's one of the things that we really highlight in our staffing plan, is to evaluate the reporting lines of police department for efficiencies and workloads of current leadership, reducing the overall span of control of specifically two of our command members, both of the lieutenants, reclassifying the lieutenants to captains, and then filling in between the rank of sergeant and the rank of captain, newly appointed shift lieutenants. In addition to that, it also recommended that the leadership within the city should refer to our internal staffing analysis projections and use that as a working document. So we'd like to explain in greater detail our staffing analysis and projections, and to see how that, in addition to the growth of the city, how that will alleviate some of the inefficiencies in workload distribution, and also bolsters our accountability to not only our officers but also the community, and also reduces liability across the police department. So some of the sworn personnel projections that you're going to see in our staffing plan are slightly out of date due to the newly announced population projection as of January 1st, 2023 from the DOA. Project a population of 34,019 at the beginning of this year. In our original document, we utilized just under 34,000. So we took a population estimate growth of approximately 725, which was a conservative approach. And if you look at the population growth estimate From 2020 to 2023, it was roughly 3,000 people. So it could be as high as 1,000 per year that Fitchburg is growing. So in the first column, we'll see the population estimates utilizing the new population growth, new population estimates of 34,000. We essentially added 725 to every single year in progression. Second column is the national average. This is police officers per 1,000 residents per capita. So the national average is roughly 2.1 police officers per 1,000 residents, which would, based upon our current population, would roughly be 73 officers in 2024, going all the way down to 79, if we're utilizing the national average. Moving next to the Midwest average of 1.9, you'd have roughly 66, going all the way down to 71 in 2028. So we utilized the Midwest average when we were estimating our staffing needs for the next 5 years. That's the final column. Our current staffing, sworn staffing amount is 55. That's where we currently stand. Yes, Gabrielle?
Yeah, have you done this Wisconsin average, or have you ever taken a look at that? Just given the fact that our unique levy limits and like how that tax, constraints face Wisconsin communities differently than other Midwest communities.
We have Dane County, and we have the departments that we work with through MPSIS.
Okay.
And it's in our 5-year, our staffing plan that you're gonna see on this PowerPoint, and I've also provided the elders with this in the past.
Great.
A year ago, so you have this, and if you don't, we can send you the updated version.
Out of the MPSIS agencies, Sun Prairie, Middleton, Verona, Monona, we're currently the lowest out of all of them. We're at 1.6 officers per capita, per 1,000.
And that's budgeted. Is that
Budgeted,
correct?
yes,
Budgeted.
that is budgeted, currently. So utilizing the Midwest average, we projected a growth of a total of 14 positions over the course of the next 5 years that would like to, from a sworn staffing perspective. So this is our current sworn staffing situation, organizational structure that we have now. As you can see, starting from left to right, as you're looking at the screen, we have 4 command staff. It's the chief, deputy chief, and 2 lieutenants. 9 sergeants. All of them are currently filled. However, we do have 1 out on medical leave, light duty situation. Out of the investigations, we have 5 full-time detectives. One of the detectives recently retired, so we only have 4 out of the 5. And then the 1 of 1 is our rotating detective position, where we take one of the police officers and put them into a rotating detective position for a period of approximately 2 years, and that is currently filled as well. In the largest section, the patrol section, we have currently 30 out of 36 patrol vacancies filled. However, 6 of those filled positions are 4 at the academy, 1 on family leave, and one is on field training. So they don't technically count, those 6 don't count towards the schedule, don't count towards our staffing. So we currently have 24 of our 36 are filled positions. The 6 vacancies down on the bottom are we're looking to try to fill those positions, coming up with hiring processes in September. And the next 2, as you can see in the little highlighted section, the NEST officers, those are our neighborhood resource officers, neighborhood engagement and support team. Those would, if we had those 2 positions filled, those would be the next 2 to fill the neighborhood officers. So that's our current sworn staffing.
So I think just to run through what these positions cover, and I provide an overview of of how our organization is structured. We'll take a look at the current structure and then look how this is modified with our projections moving into the next 5 years here. But starting at the top, the chief is responsible for the overall operations of the department and is the conduit to the rest of the city. Moving into the deputy chief position, he is responsible for overseeing really the operations, the day-to-day operations, and that then is split between the 2 lieutenant positions. So those 4 positions comprise our command staff. The operations, to put it simply, supervises really anything that wears a uniform, police uniform, and those are our patrol officers. That's those 36 patrol officer positions. That's broken down between 3 shifts. And each one of those shifts has 3 sergeants assigned. Those sergeants are responsible for the first line supervision of our officers, so they're out responding to calls. They're handling complaints, first level of complaint handling, and when command staff is not present, they are acting as command staff and making decisions in place of command staff. In the event of a major incident, then they would be contacting the operations lieutenant, their direct supervisor, and then decisions would be made from there. Moving over to the other half of the house where I supervise as a support lieutenant, I supervise a lot of different parts of the department that don't wear uniform. That's how I explain it. Those include our CSOs, so those are our non-sworn personnel that engage in parking enforcement, animal control, fleet maintenance, a number of tasks. Our court liaison, who is responsible for getting our information from our police activity, our investigations, our arrests to the courts. Our dispatch center, which I think is still sometimes an under-known fact, that we have our own dispatch center that's operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our social worker, which is a relatively new position to us, and that is a half-time position. And then our detectives. And again, we have 5 detective positions and that officer that is in there on a rotating basis. And when we say rotating, that really is like a 2-year assignment. So it's not a weekly rotation. That person is there for an extended period of time. In addition to the sworn positions and the sworn supervision there, we also have our administrative services manager who supervises the 4 record specialist positions, and we have a vacancy in that department right now. So those are kind of the different tiers going from chief all the way down to officer, and then our non-sworn positions that kind of fulfill every function of the police department and serving the community. So looking into 2024, one of the primary positions and areas of focus is adding levels of supervision within our department. As the city grows, as the department grows, and as you see in the news, the number of major incidents continues to increase, and that need for supervision, coupled with our younger patrol staff, has really emphasized the need for more involved supervision at multiple levels of the organization. So to build that structure, the 2024 requests include the reclassification of the 2 lieutenant positions to captains. And again, you'll see here shortly in the how the the growth chart or organizational chart is then adjusted. That builds another layer in there. Lieutenant McCarthy and I, in our current role, we really already fulfill both of these. And realistically, we often fulfill the sergeant position. So there are days where I'm really fulfilling 3 different layers of the organization. And managing first line workers, and then sometimes serving, and when the chief or deputy chief are not there, fulfilling that role as well. So building in that extra layer there. And then the next add-on piece is then, although it's a little confusing to reclassify the 2 lieutenants to captains and then add in the lieutenant, that is now adding that next layer of supervision. This will become a little bit more clear when I move to the next slide here. And then the other position to add some capacity for supervisory staff is adding an executive assistant. So right now, Lieutenant McCarthy and I spend sometimes 25% of our day or work week fulfilling administrative tasks, purchasing invoices, ordering various things and managing projects that have a lot of administrative tasks assigned to them. And so that's where this executive assistant becomes critical to provide support to all layers of the command staff. Additionally, that executive assistant will also serve as a backup, a primary backup to the court liaison and to the administrative services manager. We really want to avoid what we would refer to as a single point of failure, where if that person is on vacation, extended leave, or otherwise unavailable, this person would be able to provide that first layer of backup there. And again, as we look at the changeover, turnover in employees, just in general, the loss of institutional knowledge, that position is out there and able to provide support. So if you look here, this might simplify things for you a little bit to conceptualize this, but really what we're doing then here is adding that layer in where you have a lieutenant, the first lieutenant position then ends up supervising the second and third shift work groups. And those shifts, those are running from 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. And Lieutenant McCarthy can talk a little bit more about the importance of that position.
Thank you. Yeah, so as was touched a little bit earlier on is we have a lot of youth in our ranks right now. The majority of our staff has less than 10 years as police officers, and I think greater than half have less than 5 years of experience. This seems to be more of the norm in the last 5 to 7 years or so that we're looking at it. So with younger and less experienced staff, you can't just teach experience, you have to learn it. So that's the job of the shift sergeant then, is to be that person who can be more personable, person to person, be a leader, a teacher, a coacher, someone to guide them through to learn and earn that experience. At the same time, they have a lot of administrative duties of their own, such as reviewing reports, training, evaluating complaints and assessments for tactics that are used. So they themselves are stuck in a lot of my time as a sergeant needs to be focused on officer development. At the same time, when there's no other command staff present, I need to act as a command staff of the department during the hours that we're not here. So they are in a way dual rolling it. By adding a lieutenant onto each shift, that is going to take a lot of that administrative burden off of these shift sergeants and allow the shift sergeants to be more within the rank of the patrol officers, to continue to guide them, show them how to do the job properly, adequately, and make operations efficient as possible. And then moving up towards the captain position where I am now for operations, as I'm finding out, it's very hard to run a 24/7 organization with 9 sergeants underneath and trying to convey that message adequately and efficiently in a manner that everyone can understand it, and then it gets placed down to patrol officers properly as well. Right now, just being one person is nearly impossible short of email. And you can only convey so much through email and have question and answer that you don't get in person-to-person interaction. So by adding that layer of supervision to extend the command staff at each shift level to be the liaison between the shifts and the operations according with Lieutenant Hartwig and the chiefs, will streamline that process. It will also alleviate a lot of the administrative burden from those shift sergeants. So as we look at year 1 here for 2024, as we try to introduce the lieutenant, by adding the first evening lieutenant to cover the back half of the second shift and the first half of third shift, provides at least a line to one person who's responsible for receiving information, someone that I can talk to and work with one-on-one, then disseminate it to 2/3 of the patrol staff, which is much more efficient than me trying to come in at 5 in the morning, 3 in the morning on 2 or 3 different days to get the message across in person. It just isn't working that well. And then eventually, hopefully, adding in the second and third, first shift lieutenants to then give complete the span of control for each shift. Having a command staff liaison that then provides information back and forth to me, whereas I can then start to focus on even bigger picture items, which is coordinating efforts with the public, community events, where we're going directionally with the police department, and the visions that the city has with the chief's collaboration. So over the last 20 years or so, we've added several patrol officers and sergeant positions to the patrol. We have not increased the command staff. So it's got to a point where sergeants and police officers have continued to grow, but the leadership in the command staff has not at all.
The other aspect of adding the lieutenant layer in there, in between the captain position and sergeants, is that it provides another layer when a major incident does happen. We are the first point of contact, and so we're essentially on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a major incident. So we're adding another layer of supervision that can assist, especially during those evening hours when they're working and a major incident occurs. You can see the span that the executive assistant then would provide going between the command staff, the captain, and the deputy chief, and then also again, want to point out really it's important for us to have backup for our court liaison and the administrative services manager. Looking into 2025, adding a similar concept here of adding a detective sergeant. So again, looking at this organizational chart for 2024, the captain would still have direct reports at the first line level, which means I could be in a command staff level meeting and then be managing an investigation and having to answer questions of first line personnel, which is not ideal, just for efficiency and capacity. So detective sergeant would be the first supervisor, first line supervisor and manager of the investigative section, detectives, managing caseloads, screening incoming cases. Looking at the rest of 2025, there are a couple non-sworn components, including the property evidence specialist. This would be a civilian employee that would be responsible for managing our evidence and property. And for those of you that have been on a tour of the police department and have seen how much property and how much evidence we have down there that needs to be managed, and sometimes that property needs to come and go as that's held for safekeeping and then needs to be returned. That is a key area, especially as we look forward to transferring evidence to a new facility. This position becomes really important to make sure that we're organized and in a position to get that transferred over efficiently. Right now, those tasks are accomplished by patrol officers and patrol sergeants. So when that work needs to be done, and that work needs to be done continuously because we have new evidence coming in, new property coming in all the time, those individuals are taken off the road, which is not an efficient use of time and does not serve the community in a very efficient manner. The other component that is non-sworn is our dispatch center. We have 4 full-time dispatchers or telecommunicators. There is no direct supervisor in there. That is the only work group in the department that has been reduced in size in the last 25 years. So there's no direct supervisor in the telecommunicators world in our dispatch center. So this would not be introducing a supervisor. It would be reclassing one of those 4 positions to a lead worker. And the goal there would be for them to work on scheduling and the day-to-day operations. Again, not supervising employees, but helping with the administrative tasks to relieve some of the burden on my position and the sergeants. And then the deputy chief alluded to adding officer positions as the population adjusts here. In 2025, we would be inserting 2 police officer positions into the plan here. And you can see here in 2025 that lead worker and then the non-sworn positions expand there with the property evidence specialist and adding the detective sergeant. 2026, we have the lieutenant of afternoons, so second shift, and that's adding in, again, just replicating what we're doing there with the overnight, the evening shift lieutenant, adding an additional supervisor in there. Detective, this would be next increase to our detective bureau full-time position since 2019. So as we add officers, as our case numbers grow, our cases become more time intensive, it's important to add investigative resources. adding a telecommunicator in 2026. And so again, we are unable to provide 24/7 coverage with our full-time telecommunicators. We rely on a pool of what are determined to be on-call, but really part-time dispatchers to fill our weekend hours during the day, and so this would help build to that. We still would not be able to get 24/7 coverage with full-time positions. And then 2 more police officers in 2026. So in 2026, with 2 additional police officers, we feel confident we'd be able to have 4 neighborhood officers at that point, and then transition those neighborhood officer positions to being supervised by sergeants, a combination of sergeants and lieutenants. And again, ideally, aligning our neighborhood officers with our healthy neighborhoods, initiative neighborhoods, and really between the 4 police districts as well. 2027, again, adding a telecommunicator position and 3 police officer positions. 2028, and adding that 3rd lieutenant, a telecommunicator, and 2 police officer positions. So now you can see on the operations section here, now that structure is fully completed. So you have a lieutenant that will oversee each shift, and then the 3 sergeants, patrol officers, those numbers are growing underneath there as well. So then we've also gone from 4 dispatchers to 6 dispatchers plus a lead dispatcher in the dispatch center.
So just to finish this presentation off, the Fitchburg Police Department is, like most law enforcement agencies throughout our state and nation, they're 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year operation. And there's a lot of risk that goes into running an operation like that when you have a young staff. Hence the span of control that we're looking to build. That's the foundation of the organization. You build it once, and then you can, the future of the department, then focus on sworn personnel, not necessarily the executive or management level. Those are able to stay at that level for several years or a big growth in population. It's also the org chart that we're using for future. The one that you have in the back here is one that you would have for a standard size here in Wisconsin for a population of 40,000. We're going to be there in the very near future. These are, it's a basic organizational chart, basic span of control for law enforcement pieces to have that management, mid-management, command level, and frontline supervision spots. Again, a lot of that is going to be for risk mitigation. We've done a lot of work in this piece. We have a 5-year staffing plan. If you ask me next year where we're at, we're going to continue with this plan for the next 5 years. It's not going to change. We'll add on to the year 6 and keep it a 5-year plan as we continue to move forward throughout the years, but it's not going to change. Last year, we were asked, okay, you want all of this, but pick one person, pick one position. It's not, it's going to be this. And the reason why we have to do this is the city's growing and the public safety pieces are going to be needed. It has to be documented that we're asking for these positions, not because we want them, but because we need them. I'm sure the fire side of the presentation is going to be needed. I can't say, give me one position here and we're good. That's not it. The city has grown so fast, and without no one to blame, we have a lot of catch up to do. And that's the biggest piece that came from even the Baker Tilly presentation is we did our homework. There's this, and at the end of the day, how are we going to get there? And I know those are talks that have come through council and through the mayor, city administrator. This is not going to change. And thank you very much for hearing the presentation. I hope we didn't go over the half an hour.
No, you're doing well.
Okay, great. So we
You
have
want to fill your questions?
Oh yes, any questions? There you go.
Do you have anything to get started?
Yeah, so it looks like the difference between what we currently have and what you're, adding up all the requests through 2028. Did I count that right? It's about 20 FTEs?
14 sworn and 6 non-sworn. That's correct.
That's ballpark. Sarah would know better than me, but I'm imagining this is something like an additional 2 million per year for the budget. And, we're talking about a referendum and, what's a good dollar amount to ask for? Understanding that this comes in stages over the course of the next several years, but still, we don't know. Operating under the current assumption of, the recent changes for shared revenue, and I don't know whether anything's gonna change in terms of the levy limit, but, we haven't even heard from Chief Pulvermacher yet, and it sounds like 2 million is kind of the floor for a referendum ask, and that's not insignificant.
I don't have anything to add as far as the financial piece. Misty, you could tell you off the top of her head, but yeah, it's a lot. We'll have to work with the consultant and work with council on what we need to put forth for the recommendation for the referendum, but yeah.
I would guess this is actually probably gonna be closer to 2.5 to 3 million on today's dollars, not necessarily 2028 dollars.
Yeah.
During our research, and don't quote me on this, but the city of Oconomowoc, just for fire alone, was, I believe, in the 5 million, between $4 to $6 million mark, just for fire.
It was for Western Lakes, yes.
Western Lakes, correct. And that brought that area up to about $450 in their property taxes.
Very good presentation. I really appreciated walking through step by step and showing the organizational chart and showing the big picture. I've seen some of the numbers before, but having this walk through in this way is very helpful in terms of understanding the big picture and the needs of the department. I'm in the same place with Bill. It's just the challenges of the budget. It's this reality that we face that we're gonna have to navigate step by step. And as we go into next year with potentially doing a referendum, having this information is really helpful as part of the big picture. But one of my questions is, obviously there's this needs issue and, the need to increase staff over time to match the type of service that you want to provide to the community. But the hiring is also an issue, right? That's the ability to hire the officers.
Sure.
And obviously for good reason you didn't dig into that, but that seems like an overarching, like if we were you're talking about adding lieutenants, adding sworn officer, adding patrol officers over time, when we're still continuing, at least for the last 2 years, to having difficulty being fully staffed. I don't even know when the last time we were fully staffed was.
We've never been fully, we've been fully staffed for about a 6-month period
Yeah.
in my 18 years of being here.
But I assume that the 5, 6 unfilled positions is probably a more extreme level of less staffing is
Technically,
probably.
we have 12, 13 unfilled positions, 14 unfilled positions. That is the extreme.
Yeah.
And that is something that's new this year. And we've talked about this numerous times in council meetings, what's been impacting that.
Yeah. And I know you've come up with some novel solutions about keeping staff, referral bonuses for employees. And I guess maybe it's not some, I'm happy to hear you talk about this comment on it a little bit. Maybe it's not so much a question, but just as a point that, we can add these positions, but if we can't fill them, that's a concern that I have. And maybe this part of the solution is more HR staff, so we can dedicate more time to that.
That's one piece, and we discussed that because Sarah does help us out a ton on these pieces for the recruiting and retention piece, the recommendations on recruiting and retention. Again, the sky's the limit, but that's part of a budget as well. And we've discussed, we've done a number of different things, we're exploring it. But one thing is, you need the people to get the people and recruit and retention. And I mean that sincerely. Everybody here is pulling double duty. These 2 lieutenants are pulling triple duty, and our officers are doing the same. So when we're looking to recruit, we're looking to train,
promotion process at the end of the year. We're gonna come up with a number of hiring processes we had this year to date. We're having one darn near every month. Promotional processes, just the lateral movement that's going on with the turnover in this profession. I've never seen it this way in my time on. I know they don't like to say it, but my 30 years in this business, this is the worst that we've seen it. That's one piece, but the city is still growing. And even if we were at full staff, we're not able to meet the needs of a growing city. So we have to look forward and we have to plan and not think about it to say, well, they're already a lower body, so we can shelve this. Because if we continue to shelve it, then we run into an incident where people get hurt out on the streets. We're running our personnel. The only thing that's gonna increase is more overtime hours. And I can tell you what I've seen through mayor conferences, through council conferences is, it costs a lot of money to get a full-time employee, so use overtime, because at the end, you're saving more money. You use overtime, but that's like an engine. You're running it on red. And when you're running on red, that engine's gonna blow. So I understand we can shelve this for future years, but the engine's gonna blow. And if we're not gonna address it now to continuously fill those positions and grow as we're filling them, we're gonna come to a boiling point.
If I may add, because it's similar.
It's very similar.
From a work-life balance, we're seeing the newer generation employee is not as interested in putting time in at work as they are in maintaining a work-life balance. And so if we work our employees to the point where they're working overtime all the time, we're gonna lose them to a department that provides that work-life balance. And that's just we've already seen it on the police department side from lateral transfers. We know that lateral transfers are on the horizon for the fire service as well. We've already seen it in certain municipalities. What we want to be able to do is maintain our talent.
The other thing that I'll add too, it's an obvious question that comes out is why are we going to add personnel or positions to a department that is already struggling to fill positions? Well, I can tell you that in the selective world of police hiring and applying to various departments, officers are paying attention to statements being made, whether it's an actual statement being made by elected officials or support being rendered to law enforcement positions, or the non-statements by not adding positions or not supporting more positions. And I'm not saying that anyone on council has said anything or done anything. However, that action of adding positions does speak to the support that a community, and really you are representing the community, the prioritization that community is placing on public safety. And so while we might not be able to immediately fill those positions, I would like to think that a prospective employee might look at the actions taken by a community to say, we're going to support this is gonna become a priority, and we are going to at least lay the groundwork for these new positions. And we're going to support the employees that are there that have, I think, there's a recognition of it, but I think if it not for, a large number of our staff, both police and fire, I mean, we could be in a very dire situation in a number of instances, but we have so many dedicated employees that when that call comes, when you need to come in on your off day, when you're in your middle of your vacation and we are running short, fire is running short, and there's that big emergency, people come in. But we can't rely on that. And so we have to have that structure moving forward and have these extra positions and have these opportunities for growth and development, because that's another reason why you tying this back into recruiting and retention, because there aren't opportunities for growth and development. There aren't places for people to go within an organization. So we have to think critically. Yes, we have this obvious question in here, and it could be an obvious detour to say, no, we're not going to prioritize these positions right now. But where does this put us 5 years from now as a community?
I appreciate that context. Yeah, thank you for that. One of the other questions I had was, so obviously because of the vacancies, there's an incredible amount of vacancy savings. And you've all been very creative in terms of bringing solutions to support the staff in whatever way is possible. And I understand now that how much administrative duties are being done by the sworn officers instead of being out, like you said, the patrol officers are doing things with evidence rather than being out in cars on the streets. So has there ever been any discussion about hiring LTE administrative help with those vacancy savings? in the short term to?
We're doing that.
alleviate? Okay,
We've been doing that. We have people that have retired and they're coming in and working that piece. So yeah, we have 2 of them currently
okay,
that are filling some vacancies.
got it.
Yes.
Yeah, that administrative staff is interesting because the more administrative staff you have, it opens up the time for the staff that you currently have. Administrative staff typically is unfortunately paid less, so that's a, for, not, they're very valuable, and unfortunately that's true, but budget-wise, it's easier to fill a position like that. I'm glad to hear that we're trying to take away, and obviously some LTE help seems appropriate in anticipation of the move to the new building. Like you were saying with that evidence special, like just the idea of moving that room boggles my mind, so yeah, I mean, that type of help is, I mean.
Well, it's definitely not gonna rest on one person.
Yes.
A lot of,
Officers and other people involved with that one.
I would welcome solutions like that and happy to help in whatever way that we can in the constraints that we have. Obviously, that's not the long-term solution. The long-term solution is across the city is we need more budget so that we can hire more staff and support the staff that we have. Because the overtime that's a big concern of mine. Burning people out and it's already a difficult job. And so burning people out with additional overtime, that stress it's unacceptable, and it's unfortunate that we aren't able to do anything about that immediately, but this presentation was really helpful. Anything else from you, Bill?
So let's say we get into this and we're trying to hire. What happens if we can only hire the lieutenants and the telecommunicators and, is there a point where we have to turn anybody away because we don't have enough staff underneath them? Because that would be kind of inconvenient, having to turn somebody away only down the line later to try and get somebody like that again.
We're, as a growing city, I can't see that. If we were downsizing, we would be looking at, I would be looking at this differently and saying, okay, the city's not growing, we have our averages that are showing what the crime levels are, things of that nature, and now the budget can't afford this and we lose a position. We would downsize through retirement or through attrition. But right now, the city's growing. The demand is we don't have the basic foundation to continue to grow with the city internally for the police department. Those are the basic things. You need shift lieutenants, that's basic. You need commanders for the different bureaus. And ideally, you'll have 3 different commanders. You'd have your patrol, your support, and the third commander, if this got big enough, would be the administrative section. And in Dane County, the administrator sometimes is civilian. In other areas of the state, it's sworn. But you still have 3 different types of commanders. And then after that would be the number of sergeants that would grow also for span of control. Depending on the number of officers you have, span of control can be anywhere from 4 to 7 max employees per supervisor. You don't want to go more than 7. And to have that out there, it's all depending on the growth. The civilian staff is a big support. We often say, well, you don't really need civilian staff, and I've seen this in many departments where, like our dispatch, if we don't have anybody that shows up there, somebody's got to take the call. So now we pull in a sworn officer to handle dispatch. So there's a need on both sides. So if you remove one and say, we don't really need that, there's an impact. Each position has an important role in running this organization, especially if you grow. The evidence is one, and these all you'll see through an accreditation lens that they all help reduce, at the end of the day, things that will cost the city through liability.
You're gonna hear me say span of control as well. A span of control is huge, and it is task dependent. But in an emergency, supervising more than 4 people is not practical. It's actually, it puts everybody on that crew in a compromising position, one where safety is compromised. So you're gonna hear me say span of control too, because it is in the public safety realm, in response, it is huge to be able to address direct oversight, supervision, mentorship, all of that stuff that happens as a result of trying to develop a workforce and to then respond safely with them.
I wonder with this piece, if you, I know it's on the other side of the state, but you had a conference, the Democratic National Conference that fell through because of COVID, and now you got the RNC. In that, the law enforcement lens is up to about 5,000 law enforcement entities just to secure that. And they use the same basic needs for span of control as you grow. So you can have all of these pieces, without saying too much on the security, but even the shirts that are being worn, you can visibly identify who's in charge of these different groups or platoons by doing that, but it's all through rank to show how to communicate things up and down, and there's a purpose for that, is to manage large groups of people in these positions that also works in the organization from the day-to-day activities.
No.
Anything else that you'd like to share before we? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation. This was great.
Thank you. Do you need me to help out in your piece so I can sit?
Maybe you want to tune in and then provide comments about how well it went. It's up to you.
All right, well, moving on to agenda item 4E, Fire Department Staffing Presentation.
Well, welcome to the Fitchburg Fire Department. I would like to give you a brief overview first as far as the history of this department, because it's indicative of what we see in the fire service. Fitchburg Fire Department was started as a volunteer department just over 50 years ago. And here's the important thing to note there. If you look at what an all-volunteer organization does, it is neighbor helping neighbor. So most of our members at that time either lived or worked in the city, and served a population of 4,700 people, responded to less than 100 calls in that first year in 1971. The other thing to note there is anytime that a call came in, those neighbors helping neighbors dropped what they were doing, whether it was at home, whether it was at work, and they came into the fire station because it was only 100 calls a year, right? So just something to keep and take into perspective as we start talking a little bit more about that. This gives you more historical perspective, and it's also something that you saw in the police department's report. They projected out to be able to give us an idea of what population looks like, but we know that we're at about 34,000 residents right now, responding to approximately 2,200 calls this year, and that is obviously something that is always projected upwards. Our career staff has been something that has developed over the course of time. Back in the 80s, they identified even then that daytime staffing was something that was important, so they started to address career positions to be able to address some of the administrative things that were happening in the fire department. In the 90s, they identified the fact that daytime personnel for response was needed. And then back in 1999 is when we first started staffing the station for round-the-clock coverage, so 24 hours a day. And that's where you started seeing some of those career numbers pick up because of the fact that we became reliant on those career positions to be able to fill the functions of a firefighter throughout a 24-hour period. And what we've also been seeing, and this is not something that's unique to the Fitchburg Fire Department, but we've seen where the recruitment for paid-on-call, paid-on-premises firefighters have gone down. So the amount that we are losing is not being replaced at the same rate. Even back in 2017, when I started with this department, we had more than what we have today. So our total paid-on-premises staff right now, our part-time staff is 33. And then we take a look at a number of different things. How many are we hiring every year? How many are finishing the recruit class? So just because we hire them doesn't mean that they're going to get through the recruit class. How many left the department for whatever reason? It could be because of the fact that they've had enough. It could be that they got a full-time job someplace else. And that gives us an idea of what we're seeing at the end of the year. And that nationwide trend is actually something that, yes, is going down.
And how many are we budgeted for? So we have 33 actually hired, or is that budgeted?
No, we're budgeted for a little bit more than that. But we're also taking that into consideration as we bring on additional full-time staff. So that number has been adjusted to be able to identify what we would like to bring on, let's say, this year already. And it's coming from the same pot, it's just a different line item. So right now, I believe we had a budget for about 60 paid on call, paid on premises. But that number is obviously being adjusted so that we can address the career staff. So one of the things that I look at is why are we not seeing as many people participate in paid on call, paid on premise, part-time firefighters? This fire service was built on volunteers, and that is our Achilles heel, because no place else do you see professional credentialing like ours, where you need a certification or a licensure, where we see people who are doing it part-time or volunteering. Our DPW is not somebody who staffs their positions on a volunteer level. We say this, and this is not in spite of the police department, it's just not how they function. You don't see very many volunteer or paid on call police departments. And it's because of the fact that there is a professional credentialing situation that requires us to be able to address what is actually being trained on and how we are able to adequately staff and serve our municipalities. As far as work and live in the city, most of our firefighters do not live in Fitchburg. I would say 95% of our firefighters do not live in Fitchburg. So we're receiving assistance from those who live outside the area. And the same is true for those that work in or around the city. So one of the things that I've brought up to people in the past who said that we should build our volunteer workforce is I've asked this question. In your line of work, wherever you work, think about how many people that you work with have who are volunteer firefighters or paid on call firefighters. And not a lot of people know of very many. And then I ask a follow-up question. Of those people that you know of, how many are allowed to leave work to go fight fires? Back in the day when we started, that's what happened. You could leave work to go fight a fire. We don't have that anymore, and employers are not willing to release their employees to do something like fight a fire. So even if they lived and worked in the city, the ability for us to see that is diminishing. The nuclear family, we know that we see a lot of families that require two incomes right now. So when dad or mom isn't working at the fire department, somebody has to take care of the kids when their spouse or their loved one is going to their full-time work. So the nuclear family has changed in the obligations associated. And we see this time and time again. Just think about the functions that kids are in today versus what they were when I was a kid. There's a lot of obligation in raising children that requires us to be present. And so being at the fire station takes its toll. So the time demands versus pay rate, this is something that does affect our paid on call, paid on premises. So at some point they got to realize, okay, the amount of time that I'm putting into the fire department, is it worth what I'm making, and does it offset the what can I say, the misfortunes, the things that they are not able to take a part of at home, right? So, yes.
One question on it. So for the paid on call, are they paid just to carry a pager or only when they're on active duty?
So we call them paid on call because initially that's what they were called, because they did carry a pager. Now that we have very few that live in the city, we do paid on premises. So they are getting paid while they're at the fire station. We staff our initial response. We have the staffing, our minimum and maximum staffing per day is 9 for the operational side. So yes, they get paid while they're at the fire station.
Okay, so do we have any paid on call anymore, or is it all paid on premise?
We have a couple that still carry a pager, and the only time they get paid is when that pager goes off for an all-call. They still, regardless of whether they're paid on premise or paid on call, if they are paid on call, they're still staffing positions at the fire station as a paid on premises member as well. So we don't have anybody right now that solely responds as a paid on call firefighter.
Okay.
The other thing that we're looking at is the number of incidents. And in conjunction with that, it's the time of call, time of day. So I want you to put this into perspective, if you will, please, is the fact that many of our incidents, especially as the number grows, are happening after midnight and before 6 o'clock. So let's say you are that part-time firefighter who comes in after work, comes to the fire station, staffs the vehicle for 14 hours. During your 14-hour shift, you're called out after midnight 2 times. Let's say it's once. At 2 o'clock in the morning, you're paged out, you're out on an incident for an hour, you come back to the fire station. You're lucky if you get back to sleep. They go then from the fire station to their full-time job the next morning. You can do that on occasion from time to time. When that becomes the norm, it becomes problematic. Because if we start affecting their livelihoods in where they're making their most money to pay their bills, they're going to have to make a choice as far as whether they're going to be firefighters or if they're going to just make enough to live. A lot of our paid on call, paid on premises firefighters are there for all the right reasons. They are there to serve the community, to provide a valuable asset and provide the protection that we require. But at some point it will take its toll, and if it impacts their ability to earn a living and to support a family, they're going to make the logical decision. The other thing we have is a litigious society. So because we are a professionally credentialed service, we make a mistake, we are on the hook for a lawsuit. And what we've learned over the course of the past couple of decades, the number of firefighters that are called into court cases for their work that they have done while they're on duty is increasing. So we know that a firefighter is at an increased rate, risk of a lawsuit. Personally, it doesn't happen often, but it's something that weighs on their mind as far as, okay, how important is this for me, and what kind of risk and liability do I want to extend to my family? So just something to consider. And then the other thing is our available career positions. We're in a slightly different situation than the police department. We don't have the career positions. We don't have the vacancies. So when our paid on call, paid on premises folks get to the point where they have a certain skill set, are extremely talented, have been able to prove themselves within the fire service, they're going to look to do this full time. And if we don't have the positions for them, they're going to go elsewhere. The average firefighter on the city of Fitchburg that's paid on call is anywhere from 2 to 5 years before we lose them to somebody else. We have a couple that are on for more than 10, but there's very few. We anticipate that we'll probably get a good 3 years out of a firefighter when they start on the paid on call side, unless we are able to offer them career positions. This gives you an idea of how we staff right now. So right now we have 2 stations. Station 2 and Station 3 are our operational station. We do have a Station 1 that's admin, but we don't staff that 24 hours a day. The idea behind this is to give you an idea of who's staffing what. This is 9 positions, day in, day out, maximum, minimum staffing. We cross-staff all of that equipment. So those engines and squads and tenders that are at each station are the responsibility of that on-duty crew. They'll take what they can on the first out assignment, and then if we get anybody to come in from home, they'll take something else. But on average, we have about 2 people that come in, maybe 1 that will come in when we have a greater alarm, something like a working fire. We rely on our mutual aid. So the responsibilities that happen, and the reason why I put this in here, it's actually in greater detail in one of our staffing reports, is to give you an idea of some of the other things that have to happen. People will oftentimes make the comment like, how many structure fires do you go on a year? And so why do you need more firefighters? Well, that's not all we do, right? I mean, we've got the emergency response. We provide emergency medical support. There's rescue and special operations. By rescue, I'm just talking about something like a car accident and extrication. Special operations, I'm talking tech rescue. I'm starting to talk about things like investigations, fire investigations. There's things that we have to fulfill that are above and beyond what people typically see a firefighter fulfilling. There's also community risk reduction. We have to be able to do fire inspections and provide public education. That is a mainstay within our profession to be able to reduce the number of structure fires. And that's sort of always somewhat comical to me, where somebody will say something along the lines of, you know, structure fires are going down, you don't need as many firefighters. Well, why are structure fires going down? It's because we send people out doing inspections every day. We send people out educating the public every day. The community risk reduction element does have direct bearing on what we are able to do with structure fires. I just had somebody go out today to be able to address a zoning compliance issue with planning and zoning, with building inspection. That's stuff we do together to be able to reduce our exposure. So, and then you think about the training, I think that's something that people do anticipate, but the preventative maintenance, equipment inventories and inspections, we have to document everything that we do, and then there's obviously a physical fitness component that goes along with it. Now, staffing components. One of the reasons why we have 4 people on an engine company is based on the standard that we have received from the National Fire Protection Association. It identifies that through 1710 that we should have a minimum of 4 firefighters on each engine. And they break that down even more closely to 1 firefighter that will staff the pump, 1 that will secure a water supply, and 2 firefighters will advance the hose line. And then that firefighter that's securing a water supply comes back to the hose line. Anybody who's ever advanced a nozzle or a hose line into a building will know that going around a corner is going to crimp your hose, and it prevents you from extending that hose line as quickly as you need to. So you need to put people on the line in order to stretch that line into the building to reach the base of the fire. It's labor intensive, and it requires the people. So to have 3 people on a hose line is essential. In addition to that, this doesn't even speak to the fact that if you come in contact with a victim, what are you doing? We know that removing an unconscious victim is difficult with 1 person. 2 people is extremely difficult. 3 people is manageable, and it all depends upon the size of your victim. So one of the things that also came up was the fact that, okay, you can put these numbers out there, but how do we know that 4 is actually the number that is needed? So a third party through NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they did a time to task analysis of a 4-person crew, a 3-person crew, a 2-person crew. And they were able to validate the effectiveness of NFPA 1710 with the recommendations of a 4-person crew. So everybody has rules that they have to comply with when they're doing their job. I'll say this, finance has rules that they have to comply with. And there's audits and assessments that are done every year for finance. And some of those things are directly punitive if we don't meet the demands of those rules that are oftentimes set by standard and statute. Our standards and our statutes are less punitive. I'm going to say that in a way that sounds like we aren't held accountable for what we do. We are, but it's not immediate. And so we can talk about the things that are absolutely necessary. When we talk about DISPUS, we're talking about what we're doing to meet the overall fire protection and safety and health standard that's been established by the state, along with the fact that it establishes how we get our 2% dues based on the number of inspections we are able to complete a year. So that enforces those health standards. That is ultimately based on SPS 330, which is done through the Department of Safety and Professional Services.
So do we have a score for these then, for our department?
So we do for ISO. For DISPUS, what we get is audited on that every so often, and then with that audit, we are able to validate whether we're eligible for the 2% dues. So with ISO, for example, ISO is the Insurance Service Organization, and the ISO helps set insurance rates for residential and commercial properties. And so that is scored. The city of Fitchburg has 2 scores, one in its hydranted area, one in its non-hydranted area. Our hydranted area, we are a class 3. Many departments our size are a class 2, class 3. There's several out there that are class 1, but typically that's associated with their staffing. That is our biggest drawback. 50% of that score comes from the quality of the local fire department. 40 comes from the water supply, which we always do very well in our hydranted areas. 10% comes from emergency communication. We always do very well in that area. An extra 5.5% comes from community outreach. We're able to establish that. Where we have issues in that 50%, where we're able to establish appropriate staffing levels. And so another thing that is impacted is training, because we don't have training facilities in the city of Fitchburg. We have to utilize other facilities elsewhere. So staffing is one of the things that we're hit on pretty big.
What was, I'm sorry, so the score is a class 3?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's
It's
not,
out of 10,
so it's just 1, 2, 3, 4,
all the way up to 10.
all the way up to 10.
1 is the best,
1 is the best. Okay, so we're class 3.
class 3.
In the hydrant area.
Yep, in non-hydranted, we're class 5.
Okay.
And they don't change the metrics, right? It's just, the reason we're lower in the non-hydranted area is because we're non-hydranted.
Correct, it has everything to do with water supply. The good news is we have fire stations that provide us the ability to have that 5, because if our fire stations were further away, it would automatically be a 10. Based on location and response time. So the last one that I have up there is NIOSH, and NIOSH provides the Firefighter Fatality Investigation and Prevention Program. They basically are the independent investigation associated with firefighter line of duty deaths, and ways they provide recommendations to prevent those types of things from happening again. One of the things that NIOSH will tell you is that they are a public health program, and they do not enforce compliance with state or federal job safety and health standards, and they do not determine fault or blame based on fire departments or individual firefighters. So they're not punitive. However, this is what your typical NIOSH report will contain. Obviously, when there's a line of duty death, they're going to take a look at the incident itself. They're going to take a look at the structure, the origin, the responding personnel, the cause of that. They're going to evaluate time to task. How quickly were we able to do the things that we needed to do in order to control that fire and promote life safety? It's also going to take a hard look at the fire department itself. It's going to take a look at our training records. It's going to take a look at our PPE. The contributing factors that they will then report on are things like we have already talked about, the daily staffing and span of control. It's going to identify those fireground tasks that remained incomplete and those functions that were unstaffed. So from a standards and practices standpoint, they're going to cite and reference those areas that we are non-compliant with. And those are basically our known or should have known situations. And then what they're going to be able to do is they're going to be able to report out on that in a way that hopefully prevents it from happening again. But ultimately, NIOSH isn't the organization that provides consequence here. What happens is those that were affected by the firefighter death are going to get a hold of this report, and that's where tort comes in. That's where acts and omissions come in. So even though this is non-punitive, the effects of this report are, and that's where it's going to cost the city money, basically from a liability standpoint, what we should have done.
And is this strictly for death in the line of duty? Does this cover injuries as well?
No, we have a close call reporting mechanism that isn't as enforced as the line of duty death. This is primarily line of duty deaths for NIOSH.
Do they provide recommendations to departments in terms of, because obviously
Yes.
prevention is always better than.
They'll provide recommendations as far as what can be done and what is already basically identified through standard as being best practices. Nobody expects perfection, but I think everybody expects that you work toward perfection, right? So we need to be able to address those things that we are falling short on and what our plan is in order to address those shortcomings. Plans go a long way, especially if you have commitment. So in order to address those things, we have addressed this through a phased-in approach. The reason why we did the phased-in versus the 5-year, this is a 3 to 5 year plan, is because of the fact that we knew that there were going to be a couple of variables associated with this phased-in approach. One big one is going to be referendum, and the other is available funding and our just the overall ability to address the goals associated with this plan and what's needed in order to put it into effect. We do need to reduce our overtime of our career staff. We want to be able to transition. Right now, we have about a 30% career staff versus a 70% paid on premises staff. And what we would like to do is flip that over the next 3 to 5 years. 70% career staff and supported by paid on call, paid on premises. Right now, we rely a lot on our paid on call, paid on premises. And it seems like every month, every year, I hear from another senior firefighter that is in the process of just stepping away from the fire department. I just had another firefighter approach me 2 days ago about it. Obviously, very important for him to be associated with the fire department, but at the same time, is it realistic anymore?
My understanding of the overtime hours this year in particular have been absolutely outrageous.
So we have absolutely no depth in the fire department from a career standpoint, no depth. So when we have somebody, and we had 4 people out on FMLA, that's nothing I could have planned. And so I'll talk a little bit about that from a contingency basis, but that's money that we're trying to find in our budget right now that we had no plans to address. That was 4 people up. Because we have no depth, that forces our firefighters, our career staff into overtime, because I cannot mandate our paid on call, paid on premises workforce.
So but there's been a chronic overtime problem for many years.
We have overtime all the time. This year was exceptionally bad.
Yeah, this year was out over the top, because I was hearing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Yes.
We had 4,000 hours of overtime last year. We're, at the end of September, just over 8,000. And like Chief, we don't have the depth.
Wow, so it's almost double.
Yep, and we still have October, November, December to go yet.
Okay. Thanks.
So, and the other thing is we want to be able to reduce the amount of time that I'm spending on operations. As far as administration goes, you want somebody to be able to think strategically, and you want somebody to be able to think tactically. And that's typically where you have administration and operations. So administration is that strategic level thinking that allows us to plan for the future and to appropriately fund the future. Operations are the people who are going out to do the job and implement those things that you put in place. I was working on this presentation at 2 o'clock in the morning because I was covering the car and I was out on 2 responses. And so I had to finish this at a time that ultimately allowed us to get this information to you. Because the police department already identified it. We've got people filling multiple positions, filling multiple hats within the organization, and it's a lot. It's exhausting. Then the other thing that I wanted to be able to do with this phased-in approach is to address the leadership potential of our organization, to develop the talent, give them a place to go, and to identify succession planning. How can we best position people to be able to put themselves in the right position to be able to, at one day, hopefully, assume my position. So our current organizational chart, you'll see that those boxes on the bottom, the ones that don't have any identification as just a green box inside of a box, that's typically what's already set up on a day in, day out for a paid on call, paid on premises. The other thing you'll notice is we don't have lieutenants across the board. You want to talk about span of control? Right now I've got about 12 firefighters reporting to 1 lieutenant. 12. And they're not all on the same shift. So when it comes time to actually doing things like implementing departmental policy and procedure, identifying things that ultimately need our firefighters to be able to best position themselves for training and accountability, I don't have it. And this is something that was in the budget in 2018. 2019, we tried to staff it. We were told that there wasn't enough money. We were asked to find $20,000. We did a deep dive of our budget. We found $45,000 that we reallocated. Much of that came from training because we were going to use the lieutenants that it was going to fund to train those firefighters. And so that money was taken out of our budget. And it's not my budget. It's the fire department's portion of the mayor's budget. Please understand that I'm not trying to say that it's my money. It is the city's money, but we acted in good faith. We acted in good faith to return what we weren't going to be actively using, specifically because we were going to be using it elsewhere. And so 45,000, remember we were told we needed 520,000. We found 45,000 and the positions still weren't granted. So
What year was that?
2020 is the budget year.
2020.
I got the emails if you want. So the other thing that we did is we reallocated positions with our own organizational chart. We actually took out a layer of our organizational chart. We used to have chief, deputy chief, division chief, captain, lieutenant, firefighter. We saw that the captains and the division chiefs were doing similar work. We consolidated those positions into one. So now we have chief, deputy chief, division chief, lieutenant, firefighter. We went from 6 layers to 5. We also reduced the number of paid on call, paid on premises lieutenants from 6 to 3 in order to allocate ultimately what is 6 career lieutenants and 3 paid on call, paid on premises. And I'll tell you right now, filling the paid on call, paid on premises lieutenants is extremely difficult because we hardly have anybody that has enough time in order to fill those positions. I have no paid on call, paid on premises, even though I've got 3 positions for them. I've got nobody in that position right now. So we're hoping to have a little bit more in the way of consistency, to be able to promote those lieutenants and to provide that span of control that's more manageable. We just don't have it right now. So that gives you an idea of where we're at there, and then where we would like to be. The future basically puts us with 3 battalion chiefs, 1 for each shift, which would then supervise both stations, 2 lieutenants, all companies that are on duty that day. And then the lieutenants would be specific to their company, to their station, and that's basically the 4 people assigned to that station that day, 1 being a lieutenant, 3 being firefighters. It puts us within that span of control that's essential during emergency operations. So let me go back here just for a second. So we have where we're at, where we would like to be, and then that gap analysis is what we're doing here with our phasing. Phase 1 would give us 2 firefighters and a battalion chief. If we were to put 1 firefighter on this year, that would come out of the phase 1. So then next year we'd be asking for 1 firefighter and 1 battalion chief. And Chief Morales is right. We were asked during the budget process to prioritize each position. And it's very difficult to do. We did it because that was the mandate, right? So you'll see in the budget proposals this year where we have listed like 1 through 10 as far as which positions we would put in place first. But it really is identified as being a collective approach. So with this, phase 1, if we put 1 firefighter on this year, we would still have a firefighter vacancy for 2024 along with a battalion chief. With that battalion chief position, we've already identified 1 of our deputy chiefs who has voluntarily stated that they would go down to battalion chief. So we'd at least have 2 battalion chiefs, 1 for each station. Ultimately, we would want to go to 3 battalion chiefs, 1 for each shift. So that gives us, in phase 1, 3 people, phase 2, another 3 people, and would allow us to promote those lieutenants. We already talked about why that's essential. So it's an additional 3 people, and in that, there's 3 promotions. And then phase 3 would be an additional 4. That'd be 3 more firefighters and a battalion chief. So over the next 3 to 5 years, we're talking 10 people. And so one of my discussions with an alder had to do with, 10 people, that's a heavy lift, is what was basically fronted to me, and I would agree, it's a heavy lift. It gets heavier every year. Every year it's going to get heavier. So if we don't start getting in front of it now, it's just going to get heavier. Overtime's going to be more of a consideration, and it's something that will ultimately impact our ability to retain. So from a funding perspective, we're looking at a number of different things. Like I said, finance has their rules, and there's roadblocks associated with moving forward, and we know about expenditure restraint levy limits. We also know that there's required growth in the community just to maintain status quo, and that's a misnomer. It's not status quo. We're protecting more with the same, and so we're actually going backwards. You talk about ratios and you talk about per capita. We're starting to fund a budget that gives us what we had last year, but we're protecting more and responding to more incidents. So another question that I had was, when and how, if we use contingency funds, when are they used? I had 4 situations this year with FMLA that were not predicted. So should that come out of my budget, or is that something that can be addressed through contingency? I mean, it's not something we do every year, and it's not something that we plan for. So I know there's rules around it, and I don't necessarily want to take away from the overall importance of following those rules. But at what point do we look at something that is truly an outlier and address it accordingly? From a reallocation of funds, you've seen what we've done with reallocation of funds within our budget and the outcomes associated with it. So there's a trust issue there. I'd still like to think that we have trust between the fire department to be able to do the right things for the right reasons. But that was a kick in the gut, knowing that we put forth a good faith effort and it fell short. So, and the referendum, obviously, something to consider over the course of time, and it would allow us to do more in a smaller period of time, allow us to handle things a lot quicker, get on top of things where it's needed. Another thing that I want to be able to address is the shared revenue. I was involved with shared revenue at a high level at the state, just based on my association with the Wisconsin State Fire Chiefs. We lobbied extensively. We saw this bill being presented to the state legislature, and initially what it contained was the things in red: police, fire, EMS. Other things got added, public works and transportation, based on some other municipalities, specifically some townships, needed to identify where their shared revenue was going. But ultimately, the initial bill was absolutely identified as a public safety mechanism to be able to put people in position to be able to serve those core services. I'm not taking away from the others. Please don't misinterpret my approach. I'm just saying how it was initially presented. And so the other thing that was taken, I want to go back real quick. There's another thing that the state legislature did, and they identified this $3 million innovation fund that they have provided no direction about and no timeline. So it's a feel-good mechanism to say that they offered this money to the municipalities to offset that $1 billion account that they have at the state level. And they can say that they've made an effort to be able to provide it. Basically, what that innovation fund is going to involve is a lot of shared services. They want to see us do things in the most efficient way, which isn't necessarily a problem. Where the problem lies is there's $3 million that's out there that we have absolutely no idea how to use. MPSIS from the police department, it would be a perfect example of how something is already in place. They are not even taking into account the innovations that have already happened. MABUS from the fire department, all the mutual aid that we do, that's an innovation. The fact that we share hazmat response, that's regional, that's an innovation. Nobody's taking any of that into account. But there's a fund out there that we should be able to tap from. I'm extremely interested to hear where that goes, because I do believe that that is going to help us identify a number of different things from a protection standpoint. The other thing from a public safety provision standpoint, it was intended for maintenance of effort. So from police, fire, EMS, there's language in there that says that the service level includes a certain penalty if that service is not maintained. And this was important language from a township standpoint. Those towns that don't have a fire department and are contracting with one should know that a portion of their shared revenue was indicated to be used on public safety. And if they're using it on roads and that's it, that's a problem, because that's not how shared revenue was initially billed. It was billed to be able to support essential services to include public safety, primarily public safety. So, my last slide. That's the end goal, and it's showing you two things that you've already seen. It sort of identifies what we are trying to accomplish with that future organizational chart. It's going to help us with all of those things on the right from the phased-in approach, and those are our operational priorities. Reducing overtime, transitioning to a primarily career staff, identifying our supervision that is available on scene and in the station to reduce the amount of hours that our administrators are putting into operations and to stay on the strategic level. And it also gives us the ability to promote within, to provide a pathway from somebody to go from firefighter to fire chief. And that's essential if we're going to maintain talent. So, before you have questions, I gotta put this up there. So, questions?
This makes it so much easier.
So
Jason, did I cover everything? Anything you can think of?
I'm looking at my notes.
Do you wanna come up? No, if you.
I'll sit where you want me to.
Right here, next to me, like we're one big happy family.
Just, I didn't pick up on the mic better.
So the chief had mentioned, he gave a slide about how the department developed over the years, and since I've been here for a long time, I've been around for pretty much all of it. So the city's been reactive to the fire department. The reason why we added full-time staff in 1995 is because we had a fire where the news media beat us there. The reason why we staffed Station 2, the old Station 2 on Capeck, is because there was a fire across the street, the owner looked at us, the doors never went up. And the fire engine came from Station 1 and got in an accident. So that's why everything's been reactive. We had a firefighter in the budget that got trumped over paid bike shoulders. So we've always taken a back seat underneath. We don't have the depth. Like I mentioned, 8,000 hours of overtime as of the end of this month, that number's only gonna go up.
If I could add one thing that Jason just said. The other thing that notoriously happens in municipal government is we have this notorious ability to fund yesterday's emergency. So after the crisis happens is when we start looking critically at what we needed. I can't even say need, because if we were forward thinking, we would get in front of something. We're oftentimes addressing exactly what Jason said. We're funding yesterday's emergency.
We knew about the town of Madison, this goes for PD as well, for 20 years. And we did nothing to upstaff any city department to prepare for that takeover. Like Chief talked about, I work at Station 3. We're up 2 or 3 times in the middle of the night. And that's where we're not 100% going there, but we go there a couple times a shift. Shared revenue, he kind of talked about, Fitchburg's getting 252% increase over last year, for about $750,000. Per capita, the PD talked about per capita. The national average for firefighters is 1.8 per thousand. I don't have Midwest numbers or state numbers.
So this is where we have an issue. Whereas the police department can identify per capita numbers based on the fact that they're primarily a career workforce. The numbers between career firefighters and paid on call, paid on premises volunteer firefighters per capita are vastly different numbers. And we're in between. We're a combination department. So to be able to find a department that we can compare ourselves to is difficult at best. Because no one department, even on a combination side, staffs exactly the same way to be able to say that per capita, this is where we need to be. And if we're in the same frame as another department. So it is difficult to be able to provide per capita numbers.
And the last thing I'll add was, I won't have the year correct. 2014, 2015, the city paid Ethical Leaders in Action to come do a study on the fire department. 2014. Back then, they said that we were redlined. And the only thing that came out of that study was his position. That's it.
And you're happy about that?
Ecstatic.
Yes.
Was to hire a full-time fire chief. There was other components to that study that the city never fulfilled.
Well, with the exception of now Mark's back.
And that position was basically refunded because that position was always there. When Chief Heff passed away, that position was defunded and it was asked for every single year since Chief Pulvermacher's been here, and we finally got it.
So Jason also identified the fact that back in '95 we started staffing more in the way of career firefighters. Back in the day, Mayor Morissette actually said that in '94, starting in '94, we were supposed to gradually make our way up to a predominantly career fire department. That's 1994. And so the thing is fire departments, specifically from our inception on the volunteer and paid on call level and made it work. The problem is it's not working as much anymore. The other thing we know in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a significant workforce availability. There's a lot of the volunteer departments around us who are aging out. Typically, when a volunteer firefighter would get to the point where they were ready to leave, when they were 60 or 70, because that's when they stick around till, they were replaced by somebody who is younger, and it sort of offset itself. A 60 to 70-year-old firefighter is not somebody that you're looking for to go and conduct an interior firefight, just based on what we know of aging. The issue is a lot of our volunteer departments around us are staffed with people who are 50, 60, and 70 years old, and nobody's replacing them.
The other thing about, go ahead, Chief, go ahead.
So in the next 5 to 10 years, we anticipate that those volunteer departments around us that rely on that workforce are going to be in a tough spot.
City of Sun Prairie, we could compare population-wise, similar makeup, combination department, they have more full-timers than we do. They are gonna be up to 16 the first part of the year, and then they're planning to add a bunch more. We talked about it at Fire Ops, 1710, it's 15 in 9 minutes. The only reason we can make that is our mutual aid. That's it. And that's just for a single family. You go to commercial, I have 44, 24, but so, things like that to also think about.
The fire service has been reliant on our mutual aid for a long time.
And you would say that more than surrounding municipalities, we rely on it.
So with the exception of Madison, every one of the departments in the greater Madison area relies on mutual aid.
I need that. So let me clarify, so for this next council meeting, you're bringing forward a position.
A firefighter.
Full-time, daytime firefighter, and that's gonna come before the council.
It is.
Okay. And that would offset one of the requests.
One of the phase one
The phase
requests,
one
yeah.
requests, okay. So with the amount of overtime that's happening, so overtime hours are paid at more than your regular rate, right? Is it time and a half?
Time and a half.
So time and a half is so expensive. So like, I guess my question is there any reason that we're paying out all of this salary money that's basically just overtime hours stressing out our firefighters? I don't understand why that money can't be used to just hire, because we're spending the money, right?
It's budget. Overtime, even though we're gonna hire people, overtime's not gonna go away. We're still gonna have people calling sick. There's still gonna be those things that we don't predict. The other thing is that from a benefit standpoint,
The benefits packages.
yep, so
That's my answer.
what we don't, that's the tangible. The intangible is what we had already talked about. How much can you work somebody before it's too much?
Yeah, and I guess my question is like, I would welcome an additional, on top of that one, an additional person to be considered, just given the fact that there is money somewhere, if it's in the paid on call, or it just seems like the money exists because we are obviously forced to pay out the overtime. I don't know, it seems.
It's about 117,000 per firefighter, that's total package benefits, right? If my firefighter math is right, with all the overtime, we're working equivalent of 5 positions.
I was gonna say, at least 4 positions, probably more like 5.
Let me hop in if I may. Just I want to clarify, Joe, Alder Gerhard mentioned a daytime firefighter moving forward. I'm not sure that is.
So daytime, Kelly, it'll be a career firefighter.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that that's out there. And yes, that the mayor has directed staff to prepare a budget amendment for that particular position that will come to council on Tuesday.
September
The 12th, yeah. Also included with that will be a recommendation from staff to cover the anticipated overage on the overtime budget that's been created this year, utilizing to fund both the full-time firefighter for the remainder of this year, as well as to cover the anticipated overtime costs. We'll use building permit revenue that exceeded expectations. I think we're looking at roughly 225 to 250,000 is what the budget amendment will be. And when you look at, the statement of, well, can we just repurpose overtime for a firefighter? If it were that simple, we would have done it already. We already looked at, in order to do a new position last year, a reduction in the POC budget from 565 or whatever it was, and down to about 450. I don't remember the exact math, but we took a look at the 5-year average of what had been spent on POC, POX, and recognized that there was about 115,000 that on average had not been spent. That was utilized to create a full-time position last year, mid-year in the budget that the council approved. In the last 2 budgets, we have been fortunate to add 3 full-time positions in the fire department. This one, if approved by council, will be a 4th position, obviously, in now 2 budgets. And if you look at the overtime side of things, we don't have the money budgeted currently to cover the amount of overtime that's there. We are going to be utilizing basically, in some regards, contingency funding because revenues came in over expectations. In past years when the overtime has been there, the fire department has been able to basically end the year with a 0 balance or still within positive territory. They have not gone over their budget previously, even with the overtime. This year they are going to exceed their budget. There's no doubt about it. So if you know that that's the case and that overtime is going to be needed moving forward, just as a matter of routine, anytime you're staffing a public safety department in particular, if you use the simplest math for my case, if they always budget 100,000 and they always use 100,000 or close to it, then there's not enough there to transition to a full-time position. And in this case, now we're going to be using, for example, 125,000 in order to cover our overtime. So it's just not there to be able to create that full-time position because we're always going to need overtime. There's always FMLA, there's always sick leave, there's always training, there's always vacancies, there's always an emergency. And, we'll continue to monitor that. And if, the addition of more career staff leads to less overtime, which hopefully it does, then when we can start to look at that and say, okay, we've had a couple of years where we've been, a couple 100,000 under our overtime budget, maybe we're comfortable taking a reduction there in the overtime budget and translating that to a full-time career position. So that is something that I know Joe and his team looks at. I know that's something that I work with Misty to take a look at to see what we can do from that perspective. But unfortunately, it's just the math just doesn't equate to being able to say, well, instead of spending 200,000 on overtime, why don't we just hire a couple of full-time firefighters?
Yeah. I think
we're still going to need that.
Another thing that's beneficial is to address the direction of the department, the direction of the city. What does development look like? What is population projected to be? I mean, those are things that we should be planning for. That's vision. And vision allows us to develop a plan. And planning then is making those expenses and that financing a little bit more predictable so nobody's surprised by it. I mean, part of the reason why I show this in the context that I do is because at the end of the day, I don't want anybody to ever say, well, we didn't know. You never told us that. I just want you to know where we're at and the direction we absolutely need to go as a department. I know that this isn't necessarily a viewpoint that everybody shares on the fire department, but I can tell you, I like the idea of a combination department. I don't want to push people away. But at the same time, I have to be realistic in who's coming through the door and who's staffing those positions. And if I can't mandate a paid-on-call, paid-on-premises firefighter to do that, I need to put somebody in that position that I can so that we are covered. That's going to make it more predictable.
There also seems to be an issue too with the paid. It seems to me the paid-on-call are very low paid. So basically we're getting like a very, very inexpensive staff member that's not representative of the workload.
It's one of the priorities that is in the budget. The other thing is we're trying to be conscientious of what others are making around the city and trying to put them on a more even playing field as far as what they're bringing in.
Yeah. Any questions, Bill? Sorry. I did want to say that, so I did do the Fire Ops 101 earlier this year, which was very eye-opening. My dad's a fire protection engineer, so I've always had kind of an awareness of fire and caring about fire, but having been in some of those scenarios in the most simple, least scary version possible, I was still like, okay, wow, like yes, you need at least 4 people on these trucks in order to manage a fire. So fully support that. I appreciate you saying that, and I totally agree that we need those people because being in those fire situations is terrifying, and you need the help. So, and I guess I'm good that we have mutual aid available, but obviously we need to staff those engines adequately. That's clear to me.
I also think that another aspect that we need to continually at least evaluate is our dedication to emergency medical. I do think that there's efficiencies that exist, that could exist when we share a similar philosophy, mission. There's certain things that can be looked at. Especially when we start talking about an innovation fund, we really seriously got to consider what that looks like to make our process. We have 2 organizations residing in the same building, doing similar things. And Jason doesn't have to comment on that. That's on me.
Anything else you want to add, Jason?
I wouldn't mind if you guys
Yes.
don't. I just want to thank the Personnel Committee for providing a forum for our 2 public safety chiefs to come in and share their current situation as it relates to staffing and where they are recommending their departments be taken over the next 3 to 5 years. I want to thank both Chief Morales, Chief Pulvermacher, and their teams for coming in and also for putting together the information and presenting it tonight. And Chief Pulvermacher had mentioned, the terminology heavy lift during his presentation. And I think it'd be important for us to acknowledge the heavy lift that's being undertaken by all city staff, but in particular our public safety teams right now as it relates to the overtime and shift coverage and all of those things that are out there. So I certainly want to extend my appreciation for the heavy lift that's being done by all of our team members and our public safety folks in particular. I'm hopeful that the council will be able to identify ways to creatively and or otherwise fund additional staffing needs in our public safety departments and throughout the city as kind of a precursor to where some documents that you'll see as part of this process as we look towards a referendum. All of the proposal information that was collected through the operating budget process is currently being put together in a document, and preliminarily we're looking at about 82 different proposals, whether it relates to staffing in particular or POX compensation or other benefit considerations. So that information will be provided to council so you can see what all the proposals are that were provided by our department heads and their teams, the Baker Tilly study, and those sorts of pieces of information. And then we can hopefully utilize that information as it relates to what it might look like at referendum time or when operating budgets come up. So I think we all recognize the funding challenges that we have here in the city, the shared revenue that's coming in, that Joe and others have mentioned is helpful, but it really helps close the gap for this year, and it's going to be spent. Whether that's on benefit increases, salary increases, additional staff, whatever the case may be, it's going to go way more quickly than it's going to fill the entire need. And the increases are going to be small. We already know what our anticipated shared revenue increase is for 2024, basically, that will be utilized in the 2025 budget. It's less than $25,000. So that is not going to be an answer to our issues. And, we're gonna have to figure out what those are, and it's gonna be a challenge, but hopefully we can get folks on board and bring some relief to the city and its staff.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a very nice summation. And I echo the comments. Thank you for the work that you do. It's too, we ask too much of you. And, appreciate sticking with the city through these tough times. So thank you.
One of the things that I'm working on right now with the International Association of Fire Chiefs and the Government Finance Officers Association is curriculum that helps new and aspiring fire chiefs be better prepared for discussions like these. One of the things that already came out of that group, which is a task force of fire chiefs and finance directors, so we're representing both sides of the issue, is the fact that fire chiefs and fire departments in general, and police chiefs, I'm sure the same thing exists. We put a lot of thought into our recommendations. We're not coming to you blindly with something that we hope sticks. So hearing a no doesn't necessarily help anybody. Maybe a not right now, or how do we get there? What do we do to plan for it? That's a different answer. And I think those are things that we ultimately have to do a better job of, is identify the expertise in the room, try to acknowledge the strengths that exist, but at the same time, know that we need to accomplish something together. We're not gonna do it on our own, but by planning and making sure that we have something in place to be able to say, we can get from where we are to where we need to be, and what does that gap analysis look like to be able to ultimately realistically fund it, is huge, because that's not a no. I acknowledge what you're saying. I like the fact that you put as much thought into it. Let's do what we can to make what we can happen together.
I think we're overall in a good place, because the Baker Tilly study was very helpful, but again, it didn't reflect these two departments in particular, the challenges. So this was a really helpful fill in that gap of information, because obviously it's such an important part of our budget. But I just feel like going into my fourth budget process, I feel better prepared going into this budget process than I ever have before about what the staffing needs of the city are, and looking at it as a full picture. And also having come from last year with the fixing those pay disparities in that one fell swoop with so I think this will be a really good budget process, and we have a lot more information and context going into this, certainly than I've ever seen, obviously my limited experience, but
The city's never done this before.
yeah, this is,
I mean, I've been with the city almost 25 years, and it's never done this exercise to actually allow department heads and collectively collect all, staffing needs over 5 years to help, people make informed decisions who ultimately vote on the budget, right? I mean, we've seen too many 11 o'clock conversations on budget night. Well, okay, yeah, there's here a little bit of money here, so let's just put it in this position. That's what we're trying to get away from, so that the informed decisions can be made and the conversations can be had in advance of the night of the vote.
Yeah.
So hopefully that this will guide our budgetary process, at least from a staffing perspective. And I know there are plenty of other challenges out there when you talk about transit and affordable housing. The gamut runs large as what local governments are being expected to try to resolve. But at least this will hopefully, as it relates to staffing, help guide those conversations a bit more efficiently and effectively.
that's the heart of our general operating budget.
Absolutely.
Staffing.
70+%.
For both of the chiefs, if you could send those presentations, I'll probably put those both together with the video once FACTP is available and send it out to the council, encourage them to watch this as
So you'll send it out to the council?
and feel free to send it as well, but I'm gonna send it to both of them with the video that's timestamped so that it makes it nice and easy to watch. 'Cause I think
I'll watch for Gabriella's email to come, and then I'll just share it with both of you. How does that sound? That way they're not getting bombarded multiple times, even though you may want to do that, Joe.
you wanna send it to them.
I do like to talk to people.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, yeah. always.
Well, and that's another invitation, especially to those that are ultimately going to be making decisions about these positions, is please reach out. I mean, I've reached out to all of our council members, and some have taken me up on that invitation, and I appreciate that, but I'm sure Chief Morales he's been doing a lot of this regardless, but I think that is exactly what we need, is to answer those questions in advance of the vote.
Yeah, long before we get to that.
And what I can do is, after Gabriella shares that information, I can, as I include the both of you in that reply, with the council, I can just indicate if they have any additional questions or would like to speak to the public safety chiefs, they should make an effort to do so, and that you guys can be contacted and get something on the calendar.
Yeah, please.
Well, thank you both very much. We'll move on to agenda item 5, announcements. Sarah, do we have anything?
Yeah, I was just curious if we could reschedule the October, actually November personnel committee to October, so mid to late October. I could send some dates out, but just looking to see if we can do reschedule.
I think, yeah, I think we can make that work.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, I'll send some dates to the team and we can find a different date.
Halloween rather than Thanksgiving?
Yeah. And that's all I've got.
Wonderful.
Have one more announcement.
Oh, yeah, and that's what, go ahead.
So 9/11's coming up. Local 311's having a ceremony, 8 o'clock at Fire Station 14. It's actually at the Firefighter Memorial. Chief Portlocker will be singing the national anthem. It's open to the public.
Autographs are available.
So I want to put that out there.
Where's Fire Station 14, for those listening? Is that city?
Yeah,
Dairy.
Dairy Drive.
I'll pull it up here and grab it quick.
Off the Beltline, Dutch Mill area.
I think I sent it in the invitation.
It's 7 p.m. on 9/11?
8 a.m.
8
8 a.m.
8 a.m.
About the time when the planes.
3201 Dairy Drive,
Dairy Drive.
City, Madison.
3201 Dairy Drive, 9/11 at 8 a.m.
It's open to the public.
Open to the public.
Great. I will also, I'll announce it at council as well.
That'll be the day after.
That will
you
be the
can.
day after. Let's, are you planning to send that out by email? Or
It's already,
someone?
I sent it out to
It's already
council
been sent out.
and to the fire department.
Great. Thank you. All right, with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 6:08 p.m. Thanks.